Good afternoon. Nice to see you again.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
We're having everybody start out by telling us why you didn't want to be a circuit judge, and so we'll do the same with you.
Okay, I appreciate it. First of all, thank you again for all of your time, and I want to start off by thanking you for your confidence in having nominated me back in the fall, and if I'm fortunate enough to get that nomination again, I'm going to continue to learn from the experience and move forward, and I actually have a plan, if you will, for how I'll do things differently this time. My military experience teaches me that when you charge up the hill and you don't succeed in getting the objective, it's probably not a good idea to do it the exact same way again, so I'll make some changes. But I knew you were going to ask that question about why I wanted to become a judge, and something happened to me very recently that I think helped crystallize some of those thoughts. I was participating as part of the justice teaching program at one of the local elementary schools, and finished up a session with fifth graders, and it was the invaders exercise where they talk about constitutional rights, and the teacher gave the kids a chance, since we finished early, to ask me any question you'd like to ask a lawyer here. So a couple of them asked some very good questions. This was actually a gifted class, so dangerously smart young men and women. And one of the kids said, "Why do we have law?" And I thought, you know, in that split second that you formulate an answer, you think, well, there's that whole first semester of law school, jurisprudence, all those wonderful things, but none of that's going to work for a fifth grader. So I said, I think the main answer comes down to one word, and that word is predictability. So when your parents are driving their car and they come to an intersection and they have a green light and the other side has a red light, they know that if the other person follows the law and stops at the red light, they'll be safe in going through the intersection on the green light. If I write a contract or a will or a trust for somebody, I'm giving them predictability that that document is going to control the outcome. But that only works if you have judges that enforce the law and carry it out with integrity and judicial temperament and judgment and honor. And I said, that's what I like about the law. And that's what I like about being a lawyer. And I think that's really comes down to, in that split second, I was forced to expose to those fifth graders to the core of my being why I think becoming a judge is important. Because that is what makes our law work, is that by helping to advance that predictability, that certainty, if you will. So that's what it comes down to for me. Certainly would welcome any questions.
Are you still an adjunct professor?
Yes, that was a very interesting semester. We took a number of cases that came to us from Jacksonville Legal Aid, St. John's Legal Aid for veterans that were having problems with both the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. We had a state tax issue. All veterans that are eligible, or their families that are eligible for pro bono services, had 7 students, and we worked a number of issues. It was a great program. The way Florida Coastal works, it's called a practitioner clinic. So they're actually my cases for my office. So my associate and I remain responsible for those cases as the lawyers, but then we use the students to assist us in doing those. And it was a good semester. I learned a lot. Hopefully it'll advance some cases on behalf of veterans as well.
The position will likely be family law position. Can you describe how you prepared yourself to be able to handle those types of matters?
As I mentioned, I think I mentioned this the last time, family law kind of found me in the last 2 years. I had really tried to, I shouldn't say avoid it, I hadn't wanted to focus in that area. Now if I describe my practice, I say it's related to estates, deceiving the states and family estates. And we have continued to grow our practice in the family law arena. We have a number of post-support, post-divorce support enforcement cases now. A couple of non-contested dissolutions, a couple of mildly contested dissolutions. So we've continued to advance that area. We're working an interesting pro bono case now for a veteran suffering from severe PTSD, completely unemployable, but the VA is still so hung up on his benefits analysis. They haven't worked through it. It's on appeal. He's pending discharge from the military. His pay is in a complete mess as to what he's supposed to be getting from the VA, from the Department of the Army. And as a result, his wife, or ex-wife, with the dependent child hasn't been getting paid. He wants to pay her, but can't pay her. So we've had to actually work some unique solutions to deal with his case. Work closely with the opposing counsel and with the trial judge to kind of understand that this is a case that's really tied up in a federal bureaucracy, and once that bureaucracy gets finished resolving what his pay really is going to be, then we'll be able to resolve this family issue in a better way. Challenging case.
So you have learned some things as a result of your trip to Tallahassee.
I did. I think the one, they asked me one question, and I think this is one of the questions, I don't think it necessarily hurt me, but I've had to think about my response a little bit to it, because I think it's a very important question for a circuit judge. In about the middle of the interview, one of the young assistant general counsels asked me, and I think she put it exactly this way, would you have any problem imposing the death penalty? And my perhaps too quick flip answer, which I think I would have to work on if I was going to be a judge, maybe a little too quickly, I said you should always have a problem imposing the death penalty. By that, what I meant, and it's important to understand, is that that is the extreme punishment. That is the most severe punishment there is. Does that mean that I would not impose it? It depends on the facts, it depends on the case, it depends on the circumstances, it depends on what the jury says. That same group of fifth graders asked me a question. They look at cruel and unusual punishment, and in their simple minds they go, wow, well, obviously death penalty must. And I said, guys, I said, first off, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you what your political philosophy should be. That's for your parents, and you will develop this. I said, grown-ups are having a huge debate over this right now. But when I look at the Constitution, which is what I was there to teach that day, and the Bill of Rights, I said, I can't ignore 4 references in the Fifth Amendment to the death penalty. And so I have a very hard time as a legal scholar in saying that it isn't contemplated or wasn't contemplated by the founders when they wrote it. So it's the hardest decision probably a judge would have to make. Would I have a hard time imposing it? I think, as I said, I think you should. But if necessary, if called for by the facts, if called for by the law, absolutely.
Well, actually, I really like that answer. I think that's a phenomenal answer when you say everybody should have a problem with death penalty. That's a good flip answer, but how would you change that? Now, if you were to answer that question again, how would you modify your answer?
I would give them the second part of the answer and not the first. I think I've done some, you do some opposition research, if you will. In my case, it was on the young lawyers at the general counsel's office. They're very smart, very sharp young lawyers that work up there for Mr. Antonucci now. And I think what I did was perhaps, by answering the way I did, maybe set her a little bit back or something. But
what's the second part?
Yeah, the second part is the important analysis, which is it is the hardest decision to make. But our law lays out, it did in the military, it does in Florida. It lays out a process to work through and to come to that conclusion. It's first off the decision of the state attorney. The state attorney stands for the people and for the victim. They make a decision first as to whether to even bring the case in such a way. Then they have to take it to a grand jury. So the people again have a decision to make at the grand jury level. And then finally, the petty jury, the jury of the trial court, makes a recommendation to the judge. There's a lot of process in there, a lot of deliberation, and it should be a lot of deliberation. An easy punishment to administer, that's for the executive obviously to administer, but an easy punishment to sentence somebody to, no, very tough decision. But you know what, it was no tougher as a prosecutor when I would stand up and I would ask them a jury to sentence somebody to life in prison. I felt as a prosecutor when I would ask for that, I had to truly believe that this crime merited that. And I think that was important. And we stood for the victim in that case. So.
No, I appreciate the fact that you think about things like that. That's exemplary. In fact, sometimes I think the death penalty takes away from life in prison sentences because you get, well, you just got life in prison, right? You get, well, what are you talking about? Just got life in prison. But what do you think about? So do you think that the process is sufficient in the death penalty, and the process is I mean, obviously, it takes a long time to execute somebody in Florida. But yet, on the other hand, there's been the Innocence Project. I think we have the most exonerations in Florida of any people on death row of any other state in the union. So you sort of have this push-pull of the death penalty. I mean, give me some more of your thoughts on the ethics.
I think the Innocence Project teaches us that it should be something that's done with great deliberation, that we are human and we are not infallible. We can make mistakes. So the process is really all we can offer in the law as ultimately the protection. If everyone who participates in the process participates with integrity, with honor, then the best we can do is say that this process was not flawed. Can we say with 100% certainty that the outcome was never flawed? That's never the case. But the process is all we have. It's one of the issues that goes into legal philosophy at times as well. People talk about this notion of substantive due process, that these rights are as a result of due process. The Constitution and our laws make it clear that there are certain procedural aspects to the case. Those are not actual substantive rights. Those are procedural rights that everyone is entitled to. Everyone is entitled to be heard in a full hearing of the case. And so the procedure has to be as carefully crafted as it can be. And I think our procedure is very carefully crafted. We have multiple levels of conflict counsel in case one lawyer is conflicted in the case, and there are multiple levels of process that are adequate to handle. And in the end, it goes once again back to the people, because the governor and the clemency function of the cabinet have a role as well. So it's as good as a human system can be. And I would stack it up against a lot of other nations. In fact, I would stack it up against any other nation's judicial process. And I've studied a few of them. So I'd much rather be tried here than anywhere else. I hope to never be tried.
Howard, we talked about last time your necessary move to Volusia County should you take the seat here, of course, this still rings true. Yet there's almost a default position opening up in Putnam, and maybe another appointment if that default position doesn't work. Any thoughts about wanting to maintain your home in St. Augustine and maybe taking that position?
The old expression of bird in hand versus two in bush comes to mind. No one can predict what the U.S. Senate's going to do with Judge Mendoza. I have wanted to pursue this goal of becoming a judge and intend to be persistent as I can. If the position in Putnam should open up and I either not nominated or do not make it, I'll certainly apply again. I know there'll be a different pool of candidates that apply up there. I think in my mind the ultimate goal is more important than the location. My wife and I moved, we did our count. We had 18 different houses in 24 years in the Army. So moving, that's just part of that's just part of life for us.
Any thinking maybe filing in case he gets appointed to lead them?
I've thought about it. I have decided not to make that investment at present. There is, even though he's a great candidate, he's a great judge, and he's a great candidate for the federal bench, nobody knows when the U.S. Senate is going to get around to moving, if ever. I suppose there may be a little more certainty now than there used to be, but even then, I would never hazard to guess what the U.S. Senate is going to do.
Mr. McGillin, what have you done to make contacts and friends and ties in Volusia County? Because when I met you, I have been so impressed with you, and our group sends your name up, and the Volusia County Bar folks say, who is that? So how have you made connections, and if selected for this seat, what would you do to get to know the lawyers you visit?
I would become very active in the local bar. That's one of the things that our judges in St. John's certainly do. They attend all of the local bar luncheons and things like that. I do know a few lawyers in Volusia, and I have worked on making those contacts certainly since the last nomination, and that is going to be an important component of moving forward. is to let them know who I am and where I'm coming from, and for lack of a better term, doing a little marketing, if you will. But that's always good. That's good from both the judicial standpoint and from a lawyering standpoint, just to know attorneys in the local area. So that would be my plan to move forward, is continue to try, go to bar association meetings, things like that.
Are you certified as a mediator?
I am, yes, circuit mediator. Primarily have been struggling through the foreclosure cases, which are often not terribly successful, although a few lately have been. But yes, that's the other way, is that actually did some of my mediation training under Mike Orfinger. He and I went to law school together too, so he's one of my primary contacts down here, and of course one of my competitors for for this seat, but pretty good man.
Anybody else? Howard, thank you for coming in. Like always, we will let everyone know by the end of